Welcome to the Guthrie America podcast. We sit down with the amazing people who do life in our community and who are from here because we believe every story should be told. I am your host, Hetty Coleman, and today I am sitting down with Lynn Bilodeau. Lynn, before we jump into this, Lynn, I just want to go ahead and encourage the people to hit that subscribe button to your favorite podcast app, also on YouTube. Leave a review, talk back to me in the comments, all of the things. We deeply appreciate it. Hey, shout out to North Church Guthrie for allowing us to host this podcast in the building. One of the things I love about North Church is that I believe it is a church. We are a church that truly loves people, and that's what this podcast is all about. So we gladly support sharing the stories of the people in our great community. Lynn, how are you doing today?
Tell you the same thing I tell everybody. I'm doing way better than I deserve, Hetty. And that's the way I like it. I'm a blessed man.
That's good. You know, Lynn, in your bio, you put self-described luckiest man alive.
I am absolutely the luckiest man alive.
Why do you say that? Can you mind sharing?
Number one, I'm married to an angel.
Yeah.
This is not a joke. After we'd been married a couple of years, I was walking through the bedroom. She was there sleeping. And I actually wondered out loud if this was really true that I had such a wife for an angel, or if she was just an angel that God sent down to test me. Make sure I'd treat one of his angels right.
Yeah.
She's an amazing, amazing person. She donated a kidney to our 30-year-old in 2012.
To a 30-year-old or to your 30?
To her 30-year-old.
To her 30-year-old.
We're a blended family, so
okay.
I have three. Our kids are spread out from 47 down to 30.
Wow.
And so he was just 17 when we started that procedure. Mm-hmm. She's just an amazing woman. So yeah, between us we have 5 kiddos. All 5 of our kids, they are top shelf. They work hard. They live away from home. Nobody asks for money, and nobody's on dope.
Yeah, that's a good win.
If you can get to 71 and say all of those things, you are so far ahead of the curve today.
Yeah.
I've got clients and friends that are raising grandkids or they just can't get their kids to grow up.
Yeah.
You know?
Do all your kids live in Oklahoma?
Yes. 2 of them live in Edmond. We office in Edmond. We live in Guthrie. We office in Edmond. 2 of them live in Edmond. One in the Village, one in Northwest Oklahoma City, and Sammy lives kind of in Midtown.
Okay.
So yeah, spread around, but all still in the metro. We're so fortunate. We do a family dinner at our home here in Guthrie every other Thursday evening. And not every week are all 5 of the kids there, but that's always the goal. We like to have all 5 kids.
And the grandkids.
And the grandkids. And my mom just passed in January, but clear up until the first week of December, my mom came to all the family dinners. In fact, there's a big chairlift going upstairs, so Mom could come upstairs. We live upstairs. Mm-hmm. Downstairs is just a ping pong room and a garage.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a really neat home. I've been in your home. You all are in one of the downtown buildings. It's really cool.
We feel very blessed to be in that building. We're very thankful for that. I mean, there's always a challenge being in a building that was built in 1902. The HVAC system is finally giving up the ghost. It was put in 1958. Our home, most people don't know this, our home was built as a livery stable, but the longest tenured owner of our home was the Macedonia Baptist Church from 1929 to 1974. That's where they held church.
Oh, wow.
And they still hold services over 14th and Springer.
Yeah.
East part of town now. And
Yeah.
Sharon, I've been to church there many times.
Yeah.
I wanted to meet the people that used to go to church in our home.
Yeah.
And first time we went in there, we're the only 2 white people in that church. It was the Black Baptist Church.
Yeah.
And they have about 25 to 35 people there on a Sunday morning, and every person in that church came up and welcomed us.
Yeah, that's so
And
awesome.
the pastor's wife, I was talking to her and told her why we came and that we used to live in that building. And she said, when I was a little girl, I didn't just go to church there. She said, I went to school there because whenever the black grade school would flood, it was out in the elbow. And whenever that area would flood, which I guess used to be a very common occurrence.
Yeah.
She said, we would have grade school in the bottom of your building.
Oh, wow.
And Ray Dorwart, that makes boots in downtown Guthrie, used to make boots in that building. He worked out of there before he moved down the street to the shop that he's in now. So there's a lot of history in that building.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Well, most people don't.
Yeah.
And I've pumped people over in that church hoping to find photos of weddings or funerals or anything, because we can find hardly any photos of our property. Because it was just kind of off the radar. About the only photos we find is when somebody took a picture of the publishing museum and we happened to be in the background. So it's been real hard trying to put together history there.
Even the Territorial Museum?
Oh, I've spent probably 20 hours going through old photos at the Territorial Museum looking for photos of ours.
Now, has history been something that you've always been intrigued by?
Believe it or not, I was a history major in college.
Oh, okay. And
when I got out, I thought about opening up a history shop and decided that wasn't going to work out so well. So actually, when I was in college, my plan was to go to seminary, so it didn't matter what my degree was in. So I had a major in history and minored in political science. But yeah, I've always been real interested in history. I love reading quotes from guys, Winston Churchill, Abe Lincoln, Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin gets quoted as scripture a lot.
Yeah.
How many times have you heard somebody say, well, when God helps those who help themselves? That's not in the Bible. Ben Franklin came up with that one. So,
Yeah. Oh my God. Now you got me looking up my podcast history because, man, I was listening to it latest episodes. I was recently listening to it. Anyway, I don't know if I'll be able to find it. But anyway, yeah. So history is something, I'm not a history buff, but I enjoy listening to people who are history buffs,
Yeah.
Like to be able just to tell history. And that's one of the things that when I'm around you, I feel like there's always some history that I'm learning. I remember when you first told me about Macedonia Church meeting in your building and you let me know that, or that was a stable at one point. And so I've always appreciated that about you when I've had a chance to be around you. It's like you keep some history. And so out of that, I just knew, I was like, oh, he must. I didn't know you were a history major.
Yeah.
But yeah, a history shop. What is that? Do those exist?
No, they don't exist. That's
a nonprofit.
That was my
if it
tongue in
does.
cheek. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a nonprofit if they do exist.
Yeah, that's for darn sure. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit before we get more into your story. How did you end up in Guthrie?
Sherri and I got married in 2010, and we lived in a home out by Lake Arcadia. It was a small gated community, 2.5 acres. Only 3/4 of it was landscaped, and the rest of it was all natural, so trees. We couldn't, in summertime, couldn't see my next door neighbor's house.
Okay.
So it's very private, and we really loved the property, and we loved our neighbors. And I like piddling with old cars. That's one of my hobbies. And so I was really wanting to build the workshop. And we figured out a great place to build it. We could make it look like an extension of the house. And we'd already done, right when we first got married, we'd already done a room addition on the back of the house. So we were planning on staying there for a long, long time. It flooded 2 weeks before we got married, and I bought a tractor and terraced the backyard into 4 levels. We built retaining walls. It was a really cool place. And I got approval from the HOA to do the room addition, and where I wanted to put it there was a pipeline down the side of the property. And so I called the pipeline company after I was thinking it was a 60-foot easement. So I had plenty of room, and I had my plans all drawn up, and I was ready to go to the city and pull a permit. And when I got ready to pull the permit, I had to pull up the pipeline easement, and what I thought was a 60-foot easement was a 100-foot easement. And so I called to see if they would give anything and let me build a shop out over that. He said they won't give an inch. And so we started looking for other properties, because the only alternative to that would have been ripping out hundreds of trees, and I just didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
It would have run the character of the property in the neighborhood. So at first, when we started looking around, we thought we'd find, Ma and Pa Kettle's old place, the old farm where they'd sold off most of the farm and kept the farmhouse and maybe a barn, and we could rehab the barn into a workshop and then redo the farmhouse. And had to come up to Logan County for a case. And one morning, and we jumped in the car and drove up I-35, and I said, man, we got here really quick. Maybe we could look around. Maybe there's something in Guthrie, Logan County. And the first place we looked at was the train depot, not the main one down by the tracks, but the old one up on Division. And it just needed too much work, and Sherri knows I hate hiring anything done. So she just looked at me and said, you're going to kill yourself if we buy this place. And so we just kind of stumbled on this place. I was on a website called The Garage Journal, and it's a bunch of knuckleheads that spend too much time in the garage like I do. And I had posted some pictures of that depot, and a fella named Mike Higbee sent me a private message and said, we've got a place in Guthrie we were just trying to sell. We just took it off the market, but my wife's telling me she really wants to downsize. You might be interested in it. And so we came out and looked at it. Sherri fell in love with it. She loved all the brick walls and everything. And so we ended up putting our home on the market with a contingency and made an offer on this one. And everybody had contingencies going on. We closed on 3 properties in 1 hour.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To make it all happen. It just all fell into place for us. We moved in December 1st, 2014.
And been here ever since.
Ever since.
What's been something surprising for you since living here? Like, is there something that you like, I wouldn't have never thought?
One of the things I would have never thought, I don't know if you've been to any of the concerts that Gary Good puts on at the Magnolia Moon at his place.
Yeah.
He brings world-class talent
Yeah.
to a group of 50 people, those little concerts. We go to those, we bring people to those, and people are just shocked. We brought Frank and Kathy Keating to one of those concerts, and they were just overwhelmed. Frank Keating said, I cannot believe they have a concert like this in Guthrie, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So that really shocked me that they did that. And then I didn't know Byron Berline before I moved here. I was shocked that a world champion fiddler, violinist, lived in Guthrie and had all the accolades that he had. And we used to go to their concerts, Their concerts were $10 on a Saturday night. And at intermission, you go get a piece of pie for $1. I told one of my friends, I said, this is like being in Mayberry. I feel like I'm in a time warp, man. I've gone back in time.
Yeah, but you're not going to find that anywhere
Again,
else.
World-class musicians. And that really shocked me. And then just how loving and caring people in Guthrie are. I meet somebody and they say, this is where I grew up. I just love Guthrie. And then it always surprises me that Guthrie hasn't grown more than it has.
Yeah.
I think we need to market this place as the original Bricktown. Because, a bunch of 30-somethings in Edmond say, let's go to Bricktown. What they mean is we're going to go to a movie and out to eat.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, you know what a pain it is to park in down Bricktown, Oklahoma City?
Yeah.
They could come to Guthrie. We need a movie theater or something here.
We do.
And we could say, hey, forget that. You need to come to the original Bricktown, park for free.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to come to Guthrie and back to Edmond than it is driving from Edmond to downtown Oklahoma City.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that I've had friends come up here like I'm regularly bringing people to Guthrie. It's like I never knew how easy and how quick it is. I remember I worked downtown Oklahoma City at one time, and my coworkers were like, "It takes me longer to get to work, and I live in the city than you do, and you're coming from Guthrie."
We live right there on 2nd Street in Guthrie. We office on 2nd Street in Edmond, which causes a little confusion because we live at 215 South 2nd, and we office at 212 East 2nd.
That is a little confusing.
And it takes us 22 minutes to get to work.
Yeah.
Well, when we lived in Edmond, it took us 11 minutes because the main part of that's driving across 2nd Street in Edmond. Because we got to go by the college.
Yeah.
No, it's quick and easy. It's accessible, and it's a great community.
Yeah.
We were also shocked when we first moved here. We'd heard that they hadn't passed a school bond issue in 20 years, and so the next one that came up, we actively campaigned for, even though we have no children, and it's going to make my property taxes go up, but I don't get to send my kids to the school because if you don't have a decent school, you don't have a decent town.
Not at all.
You are giving away the future.
Yep.
And so we were glad to see this last one pass.
Yeah. It's been 3 in a row now.
Yeah, and my son said, "So how much is that going to make your property taxes going up?" I said, "Not enough to make me not want it."
Yeah.
I want to see good schools.
It's not as much as people. I mean, it's something, but it's something. It's like $300 a month, depending on. I mean, not a month,
a year.
A year for $150,000, something like that.
Yeah. It's not hideous, and seriously, if we're not going to invest in our youth, we may as well just close up the town.
Yeah, well, you're passionate about youth as you used to be a youth minister. I don't want to jump right into that too quick because I think I want to talk about the different careers or jobs, however you want to title those things. Kind of tell us that journey, like because you were telling me you had 3, but really you have 4 now.
Yeah.
Kind of talk to me that journey, and what does that span? How many years does that span?
Well, actually, my first career, we'll make it 5. My first career, I was a paper boy, and now I'm back, and now I'm at a publishing museum. So I started throwing newspapers when I was 12 because that was the only way I could earn money and still play sports. I couldn't do an after-school job. And my parents, they worked really hard. My dad never graduated high school, so he never made a lot of money. And but my parents sent us all 4. I'm one of 4 boys. They sent us all to private schools. But what that meant was they never ponied up a nickel for a car, gas, tires, oil, insurance, or anything else. So if we wanted to drive, we had to figure out how to earn the money to do it. And that was a good thing for us. It taught us some discipline to do that. So I started out as a paper boy. I did not even enroll in college my first semester out of high school because they had just brought the lottery back to the draft, and they were escalating Vietnam big time. I graduated in 1971, and my lottery number was number 71. 2 months into the year, they already called up number 45, and we had 10 to go. So I thought, what's the point in even enrolling? Because they had done away with student deferments, which they should. If they're going to draft by lottery, then richer kids that can go to school shouldn't be able to get a free pass on it. And so I was just expecting to get a letter from Uncle Sam, but I never got one. So I didn't call him up and ask him what the hiccup was. Now, I had a buddy tell me just 2 years ago that they called up through the 90s in 1971. I said, I don't think so because I never got a letter. And he said, I'm pretty sure they did. So I really don't know what happened there, but...
Well, if they come knocking on your door here in a little bit...
Well, it's a little late now. I think statute of limitations is run on that. Yeah, that was 53 years ago. So they wouldn't want me now. No. That's for darn sure. So I spent a year just working as a mechanic because I liked working on cars, and actually I got into doing that of necessity as much as anything else. I couldn't pay anybody to fix the old broken down cars I could afford. So I started doing that as a hobby, and then was working at TG&Y Automotive, and a guy that's still a good friend of mine was the shop foreman. I started out just driving the parts truck, And he and I'd start talking about cars and doing stuff. And he said, well, you know as much as the rest of these guys. Why don't you go on commission as a mechanic? And I said, I don't even have any tools. And he said, just use mine until you get your own. And that guy's name is Jerry. And in 1985, when I owned my own auto repair shop, he'd fallen on hard times, and we hired him. And he worked for us until he retired. All the way till he retired. He stayed there for a long, long time. You mentioned the ministry. I had two huge epiphanies in my life. And I don't think you and I have ever talked about this. But we were talking earlier how my dad had accepted a job in Kansas City right after my junior year. And the funny part about that is I was just finished my junior year at McGinnis. And I was a racist. And partly because I'd gotten in a fight and beat a kid up real bad. I was told I couldn't come back senior year. So I was just thinking I'd be in John Marshall the next year, and then lo and behold, we moved to Kansas City. So I went to a new school up there, and I went to enroll, and I needed chemistry. And they said, well, you're too late. That class is full. And I said, well, what's available? What can I take? And they put me in a class called Race Relations.
Okay.
And that was pretty fortuitous.
Yeah.
And the whole thing with the fight, and it was all racially motivated, I guarantee you. But when they called all our parents in, the vice principal made an announcement that the only thing he was glad to report was that after a full investigation, nothing about that incident was racially motivated. It was all personality conflicts. Well, that wasn't true at all. And I almost threw up. I felt sick to my stomach. Even though I was a racist, I felt sick because this guy's supposed to be a guy in position of authority, and he just swept this under the rug. And I knew that was so wrong. I just didn't know how to process it, how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so that had already gotten me to thinking that something's really wrong in this country. And then I ended up in this race relations class, and I remember the teacher. She was what we usually call an old maid today, never been married. She had been really involved in the civil rights movement at Kansas University in the early 60s. And she had such a heart for racial equality. And so first 9 weeks, we studied Native Americans and all the different things that happened. And then the second 9 weeks was African American race relations. And for the first time in my life, it was like my eyes were open. And I remember thinking, man, Martin Luther King Jr., these guys are showing unbelievable restraint. If I was a black guy, I'd be out there bombing buildings. I mean, I wouldn't want to put up with it. I was sold. And my family, like I told you earlier, my family moved back. I stayed there through the rest of the semester, but they let me back in McGinnis my second semester. And I ended up developing really deep friendships with some of the black students. Vicki Miles LaGrange, who became Attorney General for the state of Oklahoma and went on to be a federal judge, just retired a few years ago. Charles Atkins, his mother was Hannah Atkins, the first black Secretary of State of Oklahoma. I remember the first time I sat down with Charles, and let me tell you, when we were sophomores, I hated Charles Atkins. And I hated him because he was black and he was smarter than me. I couldn't stand it. But that guy, he's an investment banker today.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a top shelf guy. And when I sat down with him and started talking about, because we had no black history at McGinnis. And I said, do you think we can get with the administration and figure out how to bring in some supplementary materials, because back then in the 60s, late 60s, first year of the 70s, Black history was George Washington Carver and the Peanut. That was it. We didn't know. I wouldn't have known there was a Frederick Douglass if there wasn't a Douglass High School in Oklahoma City. Or W.E.B. Du Bois. I mean, we just didn't know, and we weren't taught any of that stuff. And so it was a huge epiphany. And I, one of the best friends that I had back then, and we continued on until he just died last year, was a fellow named Marcellus, and we got to be best buds. He spent the night at my house. One Friday night, we got up and we were going to McDonald's Saturday morning. He didn't want to go to McDonald's in Northwest Oklahoma City. I said, Marcellus, what are you... He goes, dude, I can't go in there. I said, well, what do you mean you can't go in there? He goes, you don't understand. I can't go in that McDonald's. I said, well, you and me are going in there. And we did. But I just had no idea of how real that struggle was. And I mean, it got to the point toward the end of the school year there, I had white kids calling me, well, I don't have to tell you what they called me. You know what they called me. But that made a huge impression on me. So that was the first really big epiphany in my life. I like to tell people I shed my racism in Kansas City. So, and I know my kids, you know, I raised my kids to make sure they weren't racist. And I remember us being at a family reunion once when my daughter was in her 20s. And one of my uncles, who was in his 80s by then, but you know, there's just a lot of racism in Oklahoma, especially rural Oklahoma. And he made some offhand comments, and my daughter came up to me and she says, Daddy, thank you so much for raising us right, and making sure we kept our eyes open on that. So that was a big deal.
What were some things that you intentionally did to make sure that you raised your kids not to think that way or talk that way?
Yeah, I made sure that they were around African-American kids. I made sure that my African-American friends came over and that we interacted and that we did things together. And I talked to them about my own racism and where that came from and how my life had changed when I realized that. That, you know, there's one Adam and one Eve. There's one race. It's the human race. And I find this, you know, sometimes theology and science clash, but where they don't clash is even a evolutionary anthropologist will tell you that there is one female on this planet that was all of our mother. There's only one, and they can tell that from the mitochondrial DNA and how it goes back. There was one female on this planet that mothered the entire Earth. Now, what color was her skin? I don't know. I also told my kids a story. You know, they talk about somebody being racist. I said, well, they better watch out. They might get leprosy. And they go, what are you talking about? First time they asked me that. And I said, well, did you ever read the story about Moses when he married a woman from Cush? I said, do you know what Cush is? That's modern day Ethiopia. I said, what color do you think Moses' wife was? And Miriam and Aaron threw a fit because he married a Cushite. And Miriam ended up with leprosy. God took it away by saying, better be careful who you're mean to. You know, that's one of God's children. And you can end up with leprosy.
That's right.
So, but boy, really... you can't go into a church in the South and tell them that Moses married a black woman. But she was from Cush. I mean, come on. I mean, unless she got there with frequent flyer miles.
I think sometimes you just try to ignore things, right? Because you don't want to have to. You don't want to know the truth about something. Well, so you can stay in your same ways, you know? Well,
you believe what's convenient. But we all do that. Whether we want to or not. You know? Sometimes we develop that tunnel vision.
And you have to be real intentional similar to what you're talking about with your children in order to work through those things, you
Yeah.
know, and even in that, it's still challenging at times,
It
you
is.
know, to really think for yourself and have your own voice, because there's just so many different things that are just constantly bombarding you, and
Yep.
it's really challenging. So you have this epiphany concerning racism and kind of have an eye open. Were you going to tell us how you ended up going into ministry out of that, or because you were this mechanic for a number of years, owned your own shop, or were you doing that simultaneously?
Actually, right after my senior year, the summer of 71, and Hetty, you're not old enough to remember this, but they used to do, this was the whole Jesus movement of the late 60s, early 70s. And churches would put on these things, and they call them Jesus festivals, and they'd have people going. And I was just out horsing around with a good friend of mine, and we had, you know, a 6-pack of beer. We were drinking beer, and he told me he knew a great place we could go pick up some girls. And it was a Jesus festival.
I think that still holds true. People just call it church now. They know they go pick up.
Easy pickings, right? So, and you know, I don't want to insult anybody's frame of reference.
Right.
I was raised Roman Catholic. That's why I went to McGinnis. My dad was raised Catholic. My mom was raised in Disciples of Christ Church.
Okay.
She converted to Catholicism when she married my dad, although she always insisted that had nothing to do with it. And part of it with my mom, and this is really a legitimate thing, my mom always thought church was too social playtime, and it wasn't reverent enough. And the first time she went to church with my dad, I don't know if you've ever been to a Catholic service.
Yes, I have.
I mean, it's very regimented, but it's very quiet.
Yeah.
You know, even much more so than today. I mean, today in the Catholic Church, you know, they actually have a thing where they have you shake hands with everybody. They didn't used to even do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very regimented, but very solemn. And to her, she said, that's the first time in my life I went to worship, and that's all anybody did was worship. And so that sold her on Catholicism. And I don't think Mom ever really got like deep into the doctrine or the theology, all that. And like I said, I'm not here to insult anybody's frame of reference, but Catholic theology didn't do a lot for me. And I mean, the way it came across to me was, we had this original sin, and so we were too bad to get in heaven. Jesus died for our sins, and now if we're good enough, we can go to heaven. And so, but it's still based on what I do and how I live, whether I'm going to go or not. And so when we went to this Jesus festival, I was 18 and a half years old. There was a 42-year-old man that came over and started talking to me, and I didn't know why he wanted to talk to me. But he started sharing with me how he had accepted Christ and that he had a personal relationship with him. I'd never heard anybody talk like that before, because I never watched Billy Graham. I mean, the closest I ever came to being spiritual when I was in 8th grade, I thought that I could probably get real wise if I'd read the book of Proverbs over and over. It didn't sink in. I was like I was reading somebody else's mail, you know? And so for the first time in my life, I realized that I could actually know God. I could actually have a relationship with God. And I accepted Christ that night. And my friend was really concerned for me. Oh my gosh, something's wrong with you, you know? And I told him I didn't want the beer. And nobody told me. It was weird because this was at a Baptist church where they preach vehemently against any alcoholic use whatsoever. And nobody told me that alcohol was wrong. But for me, number one, I was underage.
Yeah.
I just didn't want anything to do with it. So I didn't want to drink at all after that. Now, today we drink wine.
Yeah.
And I ended up going to church at Nichols Hills Baptist Church back when it was in Nichols Hills, before it was Quail Springs. And I continued to keep peace in the family. I continued going to Catholic church as well. And did both of them for over a year, and just to keep peace in the family. And it was kind of funny because my dad didn't have a problem at all with me going to a Baptist church. My mom did, the one that was raised Protestant. It really bothered her. But my mom and I, we came to peace with that, and we realized that we both believed in the same Jesus and the same God, and my mom knew that she had to have faith in Christ, that she couldn't work her way into heaven. So my mom, and if you got time, I'll tell you some good stories about my mom. She was an incredible lady.
I can tell every time I hear you talk about her, I can tell you kind of swell up with some pride of your mom.
And I tell you, my mom's been through a lot. But that, I went to church, and I was talking to a guy just Friday night, and he said, so when did you become a youth minister? And I said, 3 years later, believe it or not. I was a baby Christian myself. And he said, so how did you answer questions? I said, dude, I read the whole Bible in 30 days. I would just devoured it. And then 2 years in, I went on the wheat harvest to earn money for college, because after I didn't get drafted, I did go to college, went to UCO. And I took the New Testament on cassette tape, and I listened to it over and over and over. So about every 3 days, I'd listen to the whole New Testament again. Because you're just in a wheat truck, and you're out there, in rural Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, and then South Dakota. And by the way, back then you could pick up KOMA at night in South Dakota. It was directionally broadcast northwest. And so even though it was AM, but during the day, there was nothing.
Yeah.
And so I would listen to the whole New Testament, every 3 days in that wheat truck. And so I gained a decent knowledge. The only bad part of that is you don't know what verse and chapter they're in.
Yeah.
So, when somebody's saying, well, I know there's a verse in the Bible, but I don't know where it is. That's me, so many times, because I'll still remember that. The guy that narrated it was a Shakespearean actor named Alexander Scorby, and he enunciated so well, and I will still hear that in my head today.
Yeah.
And pick up on some of the things that I listened to that summer. And so, the first job I had, First Baptist Church of Yukon, the pastor called my pastor, Charlie Graves, and said, listen, we have had a really bad experience with a youth minister here. I need somebody, a youth director here. You have anybody you think could be good? And I was really shocked, but Charlie came and talked to me and asked me if I'd be willing to talk about that. And I ended up going there, and I was there for about a year and a half. Left there. I just went back to school and went back to work at TGNY. It was a really odd experience, and again, boy, I hope nobody old enough is listening to this, but one of the things I learned from Charles Graves, he was a tremendous preacher, and he said, the nicest, kindest, sweetest people I ever met in my life, I met in a Baptist church. And the meanest, most conniving, orneriest people I ever met in my life, I met in a Baptist church. And it's that way everywhere.
Yeah.
It just is. But there were a lot of people at First Baptist Church Yukon that just felt like they owned the pastor. And I just felt so bad for him. And I mean, he loved me like I was his own son. Yeah. He was really, really good to me. But when I left there, it was time to go. Went back to school, went back to working on cars so I could earn some more money and finish college. And then ended up at South Dell Baptist Church in Dell City, and that was a good experience.
Yeah.
And then my last stop as a youth minister was at Cherokee Hills Baptist Church, 63rd and MacArthur in Moore Acres. In fact, Sherri and I are going to go to church there Sunday because it's their 60th anniversary, and they've asked us to show up. You probably have run across a fellow named Monty Priest.
Yeah.
Monty and I were on staff there together. He was music and education. I was a youth minister.
Oh, wow.
And Monty and I were ordained in the same service the same night in 1978. We were ordained together.
Wow.
And he's got new church there on Rockwell.
Yeah.
But he's a really cool guy. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
I have not seen Monty in quite a few years. But cool guy.
Yeah. Man, was it to being in ministry? I mean, you were relatively still young. It's not quite like you were older, you transitioning out of ministry. But was it? And you were kind of had ministry, and you were kind of bivocational. I'm assuming.
I was.
I
was.
Yeah.
And then, not anything anybody wants to talk about, but started having some marital problems, and my wife didn't want to be married.
Yeah.
I had already started the auto repair business by then, and I made a deal to split with my business partner on Tuesday, and the next day my wife called me up and told me I'm moving out. So, it was quite the upheaval right then. My brother ended up buying in with me, and so it just kind of rocked along for a while there, and I had some old sports injuries. My back hurt really bad, and working on cars didn't help at all. And I happened to mention to my brother one day, I said, if I do this for the rest of my life, I'm going to be a pretzel. And he said, well, you used to talk about law school. Why don't you check it out? So I took the LSAT and scored in the top 2%. And I hadn't been in school in 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And so I went ahead and went back to law school.
How old were you at this time?
I was 38 when I graduated, so 35 when I went back.
Okay.
And my second marriage fell apart. And so I was in law school.
Was it after or during?
During.
Okay.
I was in law school with 3 little kids as a single dad. And the 2 boys lived with me, and my daughter lived with me half the time. It was brutal. I remember sitting at graduation wondering how many years I took off my life with that brutal schedule.
Trying to do that and raise.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But I tell you, you think your kids don't pay attention. You think your kids, and this is another part of me being the luckiest man alive. I never had a kid with terrible twos. I never had a rebellious teenager. I've never even had a kid talk back to me. My daughter was working for me when she was in college, and she overheard me say that to some clients, and she was walking past, and she stuck her head in the door, and she goes, you wouldn't let us. Because they always knew who the boss was. But let me tell you, you're a single dad in law school with 3 kids, you don't have any choice but to be the boss.
Oh, yeah.
You have to be.
Yeah, you got to be on it.
And my daughter, she went to college on an academic scholarship, and then decided she didn't like that degree so much, went back and got a second degree on her own dime. After Sherri and I got married, my daughter went back and was in a master's program at UCO. And I raised my kids not to borrow money. You borrow money for a house and nothing else. And I knew she was working real hard. She was working full time and in a master's program. And so I talked to Sherri about it, and I called my daughter up and I said, Jenny, I didn't have to pay for your college. And she said, no, Daddy, but you bought me a really good car. And that was our deal. If she got an academic scholarship, I'd buy her just about any car she wanted. And so I said, well, I know you have to be struggling. Sherri and I have talked about it. Would you like me to pay your tuition? She was almost insulted. She said, no, Daddy. I watched you put yourself through law school, and nobody helped you. You did that all by yourself. And when I took this on, I told myself I can do this all by myself. So she graduated first in her class. She applied for a job at Integris that had 162 applicants, and she got it 1 month out of school.
Wow.
And now she's been transferred. Her boss was transferred from the main hospital to Children's in Bethany, and her boss said, well, I'll take that job if I can take Jenny with me. She took her with her, and now Jenny heads up her department at Children's. I tried to get her to go to law school and take over my practice. She said, no, this is my dream job. I love my job. And my daughter, I told you that Sherri donated a kidney to our 30-year-old. My daughter donated a kidney to her husband in 2018.
Oh, wow.
And he's doing real well.
Well, you said that earlier, and I know the process of being able to donate a kidney to somebody. I was like, Jamie and your daughter are some pretty healthy people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, I mean, you got to have almost a perfect body almost.
Well, in our plan in 2012, I'm O negative, so I'm a universal donor. And our plan all along when Zach needed a kidney was that I'd be the donor if I was a close enough match. But my blood pressure went up, and they wouldn't even let me test.
Yeah, no.
So now Zach's kidney that he got in 2012 is starting to fail. He's getting ready to go back on dialysis. So in the interim, I had prostate cancer in 2017, had radical prostatectomy, fully recovered from that. Had both my shoulder joints replaced. I had 2 heart procedures last year. My widowmaker was 99% blocked, but they discovered a gene that I carry that was causing my high cholesterol and therefore my high blood pressure. So once I started getting an injection to counter that, my cholesterol plummeted in 60 days. I did 5 miles on the treadmill this morning. I do that every morning. My blood pressure's down below 120 almost every time.
Wow.
And even though I'm over 70, they're going to let me test to see if I can give Zach a kidney this time.
Oh, that is cool.
So we'll come full circle if that works. It just depends on how close we are.
Yeah. What do you do? Are you walking 5 miles on the treadmill?
I do a treadmill, yeah. Well, I do it, my slow speed's 4.7 and my quicker speed's 5.1.
Wow, you're walking faster than
So I do
run
5 miles in 62 minutes.
Wow.
And that includes the warm-up. So, yeah, the motor on my treadmill broke a while back, and we had to walk outside, and I can't keep that pace up outside. I don't know why. It's just because Sherri would always go with me outside, and we'd get to talking, and then you just kind of get lazy. Oh, gotta go step it up.
Yeah.
So, but on the treadmill, I mean, you set that speed, you don't have any choice.
No,
unless you want to splat
go
against the wall behind you. You just got to keep it up.
You wanted to chunk you. So, mechanic, youth minister, attorney. Then you take it on a fourth.
Yeah, financial advisor. Yeah.
Which one's been your favorite?
Raising my kids.
Well, see, I was gonna go to that. You spoiled it.
I'm sorry, I stole your thunder, man. No, that's the most fun I ever had of anything I've ever done.
Being a father.
Was being a dad.
Yeah.
My kids, we have so much fun, and we still do today. And my daughter, she's always saying, God, Daddy, I go see these other things. I hang around with my kids. We had so much fun growing up with you. It was just so fun. We always had fun.
Yeah. What would be some advice that you would give somebody as a parent? What are some things that you feel like you did well? And we understand nobody's perfect in this, but what do you think some things you did well? Outside of having fun, that's the key.
Something like 25 to 30% of the 23 to 30-year-olds that go for a job interview today take their mom with them. Kick them out of the nest. Make them grow up. Raise them to be independent. And I can't tell you how epidemic that is out there right now. And kids that don't learn how to live on their own, if you carry them, they'll let you carry them. I've got clients with 50-year-olds still living with them, and that's a problem. My oldest boy, really adventurous. He spent his junior year in high school. He was an exchange student in France. And after his senior year, he told me he wanted to move to Hawaii. And at first he said, is it okay if I go to Hawaii? And I go, well, how long are you going for? And he goes, I'm going to move there. And I go, really? And I said, what about college? And he said, I've already researched it, and if I live there for a year, I'll be a resident. And he said, University of Hawaii is cheaper than UCO if you're a resident. So he'd already figured it out. And he said, would you still help me with college? And I said, sure. And so he and a buddy moved to Hawaii. His buddy had lived there before, so knew a family that let him stay with him for 30 days. And then they were supposed to get jobs and get their own apartment. Well, his buddy got a job bussing tables at the Hard Rock Cafe in Maui. My son, Benny, he could not find a job. And he called me up and he goes, Dad, I'm coming back home. I won't have any money left if I don't. He says, I cannot get a job if you're not a local here. And this would have been 1996. He said, you just can't find a job here. So he came home. It was too late to enroll in school for the fall semester. And so first thing I told him, I said, well, because you're not in school, you got to pay rent for your room. He said, rent? I said, yeah, you're not in school, you're paying rent. Well, I'll just get an apartment. I said, good luck with that. So he gets another one of his buddies. They go apartment hunting, and he comes back and goes, cash or check. and by golly, that young man enrolled in the spring semester and graduated in 3.5 years.
Got it done.
But if you don't make them grow up, he would have just sat around. What would he have learned? Sitting around doing nothing.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So you got to teach them some responsibility. You got to let them know who the boss is, but you got to be on their side.
Yeah.
And you got to love them.
Yeah.
And they got to know you love them.
Yeah.
My daughter tells a story, and she remembers this better than I do. She was 6 years old, and I gave my kids chores. We had a dishwasher. We never used it. We hand washed dishes every night, and part of it was I didn't need them to help do the dishes. I could have thrown them in the dishwasher, but I needed them to learn responsibility.
Yeah.
And so they would help doing stuff, and I was sitting there drying dishes, and I had told Jenny to do something, and she was walking through the kitchen, and I said, Jenny, you haven't done that yet. And she said, so? Which is the closest I ever came to one of them talking back to me.
Yeah.
And she said, Daddy, you came over to me and you got down on both knees so we were eye to eye, and you put your finger in my face and you said, don't you ever say so like that to me again. She said, I was so mad when I went to bed. I was just so mad I couldn't stand it. And she said, you know what? When I got up in the morning, she goes, I know I was only 6 years old, but I just thought, wow, I don't have to worry about anything but being a kid. My dad's got it all handled.
Yeah.
And so kids act like they want to be in charge. They don't want to be in charge.
Right.
They want an adult to be in charge.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, when you're at a restaurant and you see a 5-year-old over there running the show, they may as well make an appointment for juvenile court in 9 years.
Yeah.
Because that's where they're going to end up.
Yeah.
You can't let them run the show.
Yeah. 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 No, that's good advice. And that being your favorite job of all time, out of all the jobs that you've had, and it sounds like you've had some good ones.
And don't get me wrong, I love my job right now.
Oh, yeah.
I'm old enough to be retired. I tell people I'm old enough. Apparently, I'm not smart enough. But part of it is, and Sherri and I talked about it. I'm 71. We talked about it, and I said, you know, there's several reasons I don't want to retire. And one of them is I work so hard on weekends doing manual labor stuff. I'm either doing something at the museum or I'm down at the shop working on a car. And so I have to go back to work on Monday morning to get rested up. So that's part of it. If I retired, I'd be wanting to do that stuff all the time, and now I'm back to being a pretzel, right?
Uh-huh.
So I need that to keep some balance in my life.
Yeah.
That's part of it. The other is my first 6 years out of law school, all I did was litigate, and I hated it. I did well, but I hated it. Getting up every morning and fighting. And so my job today, I do estate planning. People come in happy, they leave happy. I remember when I first started officing in 2005 in the building that we're in there, the first week I was there, one of the other lawyers that offices there came out and said, I've never seen people so happy to see a lawyer and so happy when they left. But it's the kind of work that I do, and I'm able to help people.
Yeah.
And Sherri's 14 years younger than me, so if I retire, what's she gonna do?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I had a mentor that at age 83 cut back from 5 days a week to 3 days a week at the office. And so 83 is my target date.
Yeah.
So 11 and a half more years, Lord willing. That's when I'll be willing to hang it up. And then the last reason, and this sounds really corny, but we've got, I've been really blessed. I make a decent living, but there's a group of clients that we take care of that I don't charge, or I way undercharge. And some of them don't even know it. Nobody's going to take care of them if I retire. And I know nobody's going to take care of them.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the financial stuff. The only reason I got into that was I learned financial responsibility early on. When I first started going to Nichols Hills Baptist Church, there was a fellow there named Gene War. War Acres is named after his dad. Went to Gene's funeral. Billy Graham sent delegates to Gene's funeral. He was big time in Billy Graham Crusade and big time in an organization called the Navigators. And Gene was really a mentor, and he teaches all the same stuff Dave Ramsey teaches today. It just wasn't packaged all dynamically, you know. But it was, you don't borrow money for anything but a house. Here's how you work for your money, or here's how you make your money work for you. And just the financial responsibility, common sense stuff.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of clients that, they learned that, well, Lynn hadn't had a car payment since 1970. He must be doing something right. Well, yeah, he's driving a bunch of old crappy cars. but beyond that, so they'd start asking my financial advice. And so I'd end up hooking them up with financial advisors. And I thought, well, I may as well get paid to do this too. So went through the licensing process on that.
How long have you been doing that?
Since 2008.
Okay.
And it's not, I don't actively go after clients. In fact, I've got offices that are financial investment offices that refer a bunch of clients to me because they know I'm not going to steal their clients. And it's just not even a consideration, and they know I won't.
Yeah.
But when I have clients come in and when I'm doing trust-based estate planning, we have to do certain things with their investments. And when I ask them who their investment advisor is, and they can't even give me a name, that tells me nobody's taking care of them.
Yeah.
Or they say, well, it was John, but he left there, and I don't know who took his place. And I say, well, when's the last time they had a review meeting with you? And they go, I don't know that we ever had one. Well, if you're not meeting with these people once a year and going over things and seeing what's going on in their life, I mean, you're not taking care of them. And so for people like that, I'll say, if you want to talk to advisors that'll take care of you, my partner and I will sit down with you and talk.
Yeah.
So we end up getting a lot of business that way.
Yeah.
But it's not something I actively pursue. I don't advertise. I don't go out and do stuff like that. But it's just another level of service that I can provide for people, because if nobody's taking care of them and I can, I'd like to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, my dad is 70, and I do some work with him on a nonprofit. And I was thinking to myself, because he's always like, he's always working. He still works for himself. He has a construction company, and they do some wastewater coating. And he's an attorney by trade. And he went to law school at University of Florida, got his MBA and law degree at the same time. Actually, the first African American to graduate from University of Florida with both. And so,
really?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, yeah. And but I was thinking, for a moment there, I was kind of pushing him not to work so much. But then T.D. Jakes, you know who T.D. Jakes is? A preacher. He's a televangelist, big church out. He said one time he was at dinner with a guy, and this guy, he said, if you would have known if I would have said the guy's name, you would know who it was. But he heard me talking about retiring. And this guy's older than me, and he leans over to me, and he said, TD, the best work I ever did was after 70. And he said, ever since then, he said, I never really thought about retiring. And I just thought about my dad. It's like, man, and right now I feel like he is doing work that he feels like is going to leave a legacy more so than
right.
And I think a lot of what he does now is just so he can take care of things that he's passionate about.
Well, and the other reason that I didn't even get to is my dad died the summer of 98. I never thought my mom would remarry because she's so independent, but she did. She met and actually knew somebody she'd gone to church with for 35 years, and they were both widowed. And she married a really nice guy. And when he died, Mom just kind of curled up. All her friends are dying. She wasn't as engaged. And she quit drinking water. She started eating junk food, and she wasn't engaged. And that's when she started down the road of dementia. And I think one of the keys to avoiding dementia is staying engaged. And so I can't retire if I'm going to stay engaged, and eating well and getting some exercise and drinking plenty of fluids.
Yeah.
And Mom didn't get any of that. And it was really sad to see somebody that was so strong and so independent go down that road that she went down. It was really hard to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, and at the same time, I'm always encouraging my mom to go do something because she doesn't work. She just kind of and so, yeah. Tell me why someone who, seemingly done well for yourself, great family, great wife, why would you take on this publishing museum?
Did you ever meet a guy named Lloyd Lentz? His nickname was Lud. Lloyd Lentz.
Yeah. I think I know who Lloyd Lentz is.
I think it was the summer of 2015.
Let me make sure that people understand.
Go right ahead.
So you've taken on the State Capitol Publishing Museum as far as, what did you say, renovating it, bringing it back to life?
Correct.
Yes.
I am the unpaid CEO. They asked me if I'd be CEO, and I said only if you won't pay me. This is a volunteer position. And so, I've got my regular job. I piddle with cars about 20 hours a week, and I do about 20 hours a week at the museum, either administratively or physically over there actually working on stuff. So we stay really busy. Lloyd was the curator of the museum when they first opened it in 1982. Okay. Sherri and I, right after we moved to Guthrie, it's one of Sherri's favorite vehicles that I have, even though she refuses to drive it. I've got a 49 Studebaker dump truck. It's an old farm truck from South Dakota. And after we moved in our house, we landscaped to the south of it there because we bought that lot with it. And we were laying sod, and that dump truck was sitting out front. And I heard this truck coming down the street, and it just literally locked up all four tires, screeching to a halt. This guy jumps out, leaves the door open, truck's running out there on 2nd Street, and he runs up to it, to my truck, and he goes, "This is the coolest truck I've ever seen." He just fell in love with my truck, and so we ended up striking up a friendship, Lloyd and I. Well, a couple years later, I don't know how much of the history you know, but the OHS operated that as a museum up until 2012, and the boiler quit working in 2012, and they couldn't afford to fix it, and their budget had been cut in half, and so they just closed the doors. And OMES, Office of Management Enterprise Services, a state agency, probably step on some toes here, but somebody got the idea that we would make government more efficient in Oklahoma if we had an extra level of bureaucracy to oversee every other agency. So they created, we call them OMES.
Yeah.
My son and daughter-in-law both work for OSBI. They get their checks from OMES. And so OMES made every state agency inventory everything they owned, and you had to tell them what you were using it for. Well, when OHS inventoried and they listed that building, it just put not in use. So they get a letter from OMES saying that surplus property, you have to sell it. And Bob Blackburn's going, have to sell it. He was the executive director at OHS at the time. And his hands were really tied because they had passed a law giving OMES the authority to order people to sell their surplus property to other agencies. And so they put feelers out. They actually awarded a contract to a developer from St. Louis who was going to gut the building, use low-income housing tax credits, and turn it into 34 low-income apartments. So Lloyd put a card in my mailbox that said, Lynn, they're trying to turn this into apartments. We can't let them do that. And I'd never even set foot in the building at the time, but I'd heard Lloyd talk about it a few times. And he said, he called me up and he said, listen, I've talked to a bunch of people and nobody in Guthrie wants this to happen. And we need to figure out how to stop it. And I said, well, didn't they already award a contract? And he said, yeah, they did. He said, but we'd like to have a meeting. Is it okay if we meet at your house? And I said, yeah, we can do that. And I was expecting 8 or 10 people. 32 people show up, including the mayor, one of the city councilmen, a guy named Ralph McCalmont, who used to own what's now Bank First. He and Ben Coffin's dad, Don, had been instrumental in saving a bunch of old buildings back in the 70s and 80s. And first thing that happened was city council passed a new ordinance saying you can't put more than 12 apartments in one building in the historic district. So they were putting up a roadblock for them. And somebody suggested we go talk to A.J. Griffin, who was our state senator at the time, and she said, all I can tell you is stall it the best you can, and we're going to see what we can do. Well, Bob Blackburn had gone to A.J. and said, look, you need to get a law passed that will exempt us from that procedure if we own historic property that's been donated to us. We need to be able to get that back to private hands. And so, sure enough, she introduces the law. She gets, and it was done under appropriation, so her name's not even on it, but she was the impetus for getting that done. So I started doing a bunch of research on the development company and figuring out what all the different things that were going to happen. I went to the Planning Commission meeting where they were asking for a variance from the 12-unit limit. And I was only supposed to talk for 5 minutes, but I went for 20 minutes and nobody stopped me. And I told them all the problems with this. I said, look, once they do one of these, I said, yeah, there's federal money coming in, but after 10 years, it's back in private hands. If they want this to be Section 8 housing, it's Section 8 housing. There's no limits on it after that. And I said, here's the other problem I have. They're wanting to put 34 apartments in. There's only 14 parking places there. Where are they going to park? Because some of those apartments are going to have mom and pop in them, right?
Yeah.
2 people.
Yeah.
They're going to park up and down Harrison.
Yeah.
And I said, the retail needs all that parking up and down there. I said, there's no green space. And I said, and the other thing is, I hope you guys realize how historic this building is. We're going to gut it. We're going to lose all these artifacts. And so Planning Commission shot them down unanimously. And so they appealed to the full city council. Well, as luck would have it, the day before the city council meeting, Governor Mary Fallin signs the new law into effect with the emergency clause, meaning it's effective right now. So I walk into that one with the new law and all the same other arguments that I had. And I said, you guys have an out now. We can get this back into private hands. And it turned out it had been donated to them by Guthrie Chamber of Commerce, who had no idea that they even had a big chip in the game, but they did.
Yeah.
And so a fellow that was really in favor of the developer came up to me after that city council meeting and said, that's great. You ran them out of town, because the city council shot them down 6-1. And it was pretty clear at that point the developer wasn't going to fight it anymore. He just left town. And so it just left the contract being void because it was dependent on him being able to get all of the licensing and everything that he needed. And he said, that's great. You ran him out of town. What are you going to do with it? I said, I think we ought to form a nonprofit. I think we ought to get it back in private hands. I think we ought to raise private money and restore it for what it used to be. That building's been neglected forever. Most of the third floor windows that are boarded up, I've got a picture of that building, 1965, they were already boarded up.
Oh, wow. Wow.
So
it was boarded up when we used to do a tour there every grade year. I think every fifth grade.
But it was just the first floor.
But it was just the first floor, yeah.
That was it. They never got to OHS. They did a lot of work on it between 75 and 82. They never did the windows in the basement, never got to the second floor. It was just the first floor. So we want to get the whole building up and operational. We want to do an external elevator on the back of it, and that way we'll be ADA compliant to all 4 floors. We could say we're grandfathered in and we don't have to be, but I want to be ADA compliant. I want everybody included in this deal. But it's just such a cool building. The really sad part of that, Lloyd and I both were diagnosed with prostate cancer about the same time. I opted for the radical prostatectomy, and I was very fortunate because I didn't even know I had it, and I had no symptoms. My primary care physician, Dr. Christopher Hayes, saw my PSA numbers go up 3 years in a row, and so he sent me for a biopsy. But it wasn't a high number. It wasn't high enough that it would even alert. Most physicians would look at that and think nothing of it. And I had prostate cancer, and it turned out to be very aggressive. It was the size of a baseball already at biopsy, and 6 weeks later when I had it removed, it was the size of a softball. That's pretty aggressive. It grew a finger into my bladder. They had to resect part of my bladder. Wow. And that ended up getting infected. That was worse than the prostate surgery. Oh, man, I ended up back in the hospital. Yeah, it was, but Lloyd opted for the proton therapy, and they didn't get it all. And so he ended up dying the summer of 2018, right after we made our deal. And you know, when I formed that nonprofit, Sharon, I'd still never set foot in the building.
Oh, wow.
I'd never even been in there. I just knew we needed to figure out how to rescue this building and get it back in private hands. It's just a really important part of Oklahoma history.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Lynn, great story.
And we didn't even get to my
mom. Great story. I think it would only be right, though, you share maybe a quick story about your mom that you want to share.
Okay.
But yeah, because I know that I remember we were at the YWCA banquet.
Engaging men's
event, raising money.
Yep.
And I was just sitting there, but I was listening to you talk to a couple of men about your mom. And just tell me a little bit about who she was to you.
Well, my mom was born in May of 29, so right before the Depression started. Her family stayed in western Oklahoma throughout the Dust Bowl. My granddad used to say they didn't even know when the Depression started, they were already poor.
They didn't know no difference, right?
But my mom, she lived in a house one summer with no glass panes in some of the windows, just put cardboard up, put wet blankets up there to stop the dust. She got passed around from relative to relative for a couple of years because her parents couldn't feed her. It was just really, really tough. She was molested as a little girl, which is one reason I'm active with YWCA and the domestic violence, not just domestic violence, but all the other things that go with that. She was violently raped in 1952. Tear up on you a little bit here. My dad grew up in a home with a drunkard wife-beater dad. My dad never finished high school, but it wasn't because he was a slacker. He quit school to go to work and put food on the table because his own dad couldn't do that. He was the oldest of 4 kids. And then he ended up in the service and fought in the Pacific Theater. And I could tell you cool stories about my dad. And my dad had a lot of good qualities, but my dad, because of his upbringing, didn't know how to deal with certain things. And one of them was what had happened to my mom in 1952 and the family rift that caused for many, many years. So when I was 6 years old, one thing about my mom, you weren't allowed to make excuses and you weren't allowed to whine. So when I was 6 years old, I had a brother 3 years older than me. Still have a brother 3 years older. Didn't want to put him in the past tense there. So my 9-year-old brother and I go down to the ball field one Saturday morning to play baseball. And every other kid there is 9 or 10 years old. I'm 6. And so I was the last one chosen. And when we went home, we went and played ball. We went home, and I wasn't crying about it, but I was whining a little bit to Mom about being the last one chosen. And you know what half the moms would do today? They'd go call all the other moms and say, oh, we're not being inclusive. We need to make sure and do this in a more equitable way so nobody gets their feelings hurt. You know what my mom said to me? Why don't you go practice till you're better than them? Mm. That's what my mom said to me.
Yeah.
And she went way out of her way to instill self-confidence. And my mom didn't just say, go do that. She took me in the backyard and started throwing to me.
Yeah.
She hung up a blanket for me to pitch at and do target practice so I could develop a good arm and some accuracy there.
Yeah.
And by the time I was in 6th grade, I got to play against 8th and 9th graders. I played on the junior high team, and I was the only 6th grader in school played on the junior high team.
Wow.
My only claim to fame, and I mean, I wore myself out in high school. I didn't do any college athletics, and I was not a great football player. I was decent, but I did excel pretty well at baseball. It was just summer ball, but it was still a high school ball. I threw a no-hitter and hit a home run in the same game.
Oh, wow.
It's only been done 3 times in Major League history.
Wow.
3 times.
Yeah.
And amazingly, and my granddad, my mom's dad, was a prize fighter. He was a boxer, and he was a tremendous athlete. He was the fastest man in the Navy in 1923.
Oh, wow.
And that was the only game my granddad ever saw me play baseball.
Oh.
He was at that game.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Well, that's the one you want to be at.
But I got that confidence, and you know, I've been people get mad and tell me I'm a pompous ass and I'm too cocky, and I say I'm sure I carry myself with a bit of an air of confidence, but it's what my mom instilled in me.
Yeah. It ain't nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, I have my mom to thank for that.
Yeah. And now hearing that, now I see how you went about raising your children with that same type of, you can get this done. Right. You can do this. You can do it. Yeah, you can do this. And that's good for them.
Yeah.
To have somebody in their life who pushes them and let them know.
Well, let me tell you, I got twin 11-year-old grandsons. They're the 2 littlest guys out there. Every time they play baseball and every time they play basketball, they're the 2 best athletes out there.
Yeah.
I taught them to hit a real ball with a real bat when they were 3 years old.
Oh, wow.
So they were miles ahead of everybody else. They could turn double plays at age 9 playing short and second.
Wow.
At 9 years old.
Yeah.
And it's really fun watching them play basketball. And I mean, you know, they're so little. My dad's mother was only 4'10".
Okay.
So they came by the short gene, honestly, you know.
It was nothing they did.
But they've got the ball handling skills. They can dribble between their legs in games.
Okay.
They've got the
handling that ball
skills.
Can get you a long ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can handle that rock.
So I take partial credit for that.
That's good.
Because I started working with them on that stuff that every other Friday that we're off work and we have their grandsons.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Lynn, how can people support the museum?
We're doing a fundraiser October 24th. Funny you would ask. If you type in publishingmuseum.anything, net, org, com, you'll get our website. They'll all funnel to that same website. But go in there and check it out. Come to the fundraiser. Tickets are $100 in advance, $125 at the door. We've got some really cool auction items. One of them's a photo safari trip to South Africa. We've got several trips to different resorts and stuff. Dr. Bob Palmer, if you've ever been to the state capitol, most of the murals in the state capitol were painted by Dr. Bob Palmer. He used to have an art place here in downtown Guthrie. He's donated a couple pieces of artwork that we're going to auction off. I have one of his pieces in my game room that we bought 2 years ago at that auction. So it's going to be a fun evening. We always have a lot of fun. It's short. You will hear from 4 ex-governors, the current governor, the current lieutenant governor, the mayor of Guthrie, even Mike Rowe shot some video for us. So we got an all-star cast. It's going to be really cool. And people have asked me, are they all going to be there live? No, it's going to be video, but we've been doing interviews with them along the way. I had 4 ex-governors in there at one time on 89er Day.
Yeah.
And boy, you get George Nye, Frank Keating, David Walters, and Brad Henry in a room together. Those guys are a scream. and the most fun thing about them is they actually remember government where a Democrat and a Republican could still be friends and still get along. They didn't have all the hatred that we've got in our politics today, but they all worked across the aisle. They all did things with the other party. Yeah. And boy, I miss those days. I hope we get back to them. I hope this is the last election cycle we have to deal with this nonsense. It's sad. It's bad for the country, too.
Yeah. Yeah. Lynn, thank you so much.
You bet.
I appreciate your time and your willingness to sit down with me and share your story with us. And any last words?
And no, just thank you so much for the opportunity. And we, like you said, you appreciate North Church. We appreciate North Church.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Great place to worship.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're on a mission to have every story told of the people who are doing life here and who are from here. And the question I always like to end with is, will yours be next? Go in.